How's there, everyone? Welcome to my final capstone project presentation. For my project, I decided to design an experiment that would investigate whether there is a correlation between the duration of the pre-jump flexion and takeoff acceleration of the hinge mechanism in click beetles, or the Elataridae. So the click beetles are commonly known for their clicking or snapping mechanism. And if you've ever played with one of these beetles, if you were to flip it on its dorsal side, you would notice that it would click or jump in a very abrupt manner as a way of trying to upright itself. And not only do these beetles elicit their click mechanism as a way of uprighting themselves, but they also use this as a way to get away from predators, so it is an escape response. So how exactly does this click mechanism work? So the beetle is divided into two subunits by a hinge, and within this hinge is where the clicking mechanism occurs. So it is the two structures that are mainly responsible for that click, and that is the peg and the mesosternal lip, while the actual contraction and the flexion of the head is elicited by the peg moving muscle. So I'm going to demonstrate this using my trusty stapler. So when a beetle lands on its dorsal side, it is not directly parallel to the floor. It kind of lands in an angle. And so what happens is when the beetle tries to elicit its clicking mechanism, it starts to flex its head dorsally using its peg moving muscle, which is over here, as I pointed out earlier. And that flexion causes the storage of elastic energy to just constantly build. So elastic energy is being stored and stored and stored, and at the same time, the peg is moving from its resting position to a bracing position for the jumping mechanism. So once that contraction is stopped, the energy is released, causing the snap and launches the beetle up into the air. So here are some pictures that better explains it. So here, this is when the beetle lands on its back, and here the head is starting to flex, and at the same time, tension and elastic energy is being stored in this peg moving muscle. And then once the beetle decides to stop contracting, the peg slips past the mesosternal lip back into its resting position, and all the elastic energy that is stored in the muscle is released, and that launches the bug into the air. So here we see that the beetle is trying to get up using its appendages, and when it knows it can't, it starts flexing, building up elastic energy, and then finally snaps. And here's a better view of what happens during the clicking mechanism as seen through an X-ray. So here we see muscle tension over here just building up as the beetle is contracting, and then once it decides to stop contracting, all those elastic energy is released and the peg slips past the mesosternal lip, and those combination of actions launches the beetle abruptly into the air. Okay, so although the morphology of the mechanism is understood fairly well, there is still a lot of concepts about the clicking mechanisms that it has not been studied. So for example, I got my inspiration from this paper, particularly right here. And in this research paper, they aimed to study whether the beetle had any type of control in the degree or angle in which they launched their body to, or how many rotations that happens in the air. And through their finding, they found that the body rotations and the jump angle of the beetle are totally spontaneous. So landing on their feet occurs by luck. They have no control over that. And that is what I have observed when I was looking at my beetle. It would constantly click in order to upright itself. It never just perfectly clicked once and landed on its feet. And also during their research, they found that there may be some type of control of their takeoff acceleration. So from the data they gathered, they proposed that there might be some type of control of their takeoff acceleration by controlling the duration of the pre-jump phase. So the duration in which the click beetle flexes its head and stores up all that elastic energy, they they hypothesize, or they found some data that supports that maybe they're able to control just how much their acceleration is based on the duration of their pre-jump phase. So it is for this reason why I decided to conduct my experiment. I wanted to investigate whether the click beetles can in fact control their takeoff acceleration by controlling the duration of their pre-jump phase. And I hypothesized that a longer duration of the pre-jump phase will result in a greater takeoff acceleration due to the increased amount of elastic energy stored and released when the peg slips past the mesosternal lip. So my main focus of this whole experiment is to basically determine if there's any type of relationship between tension and duration of the pre-jump flexion. And so how I would do this is I would get my beetle and I would hook it up to a force tensometer. And what will happen is I will get a nylon string and I would glue it to the back of the head of my beetle where the peg moving muscle is, and I would attach that nylon string to the force tensometer, making sure that that string is taut. So when the beetle moves its head in a flexing position, it's able to, the force tensometer is able to accurately read the tension that's being built in that peg moving muscle. And then, of course, we are all familiar with our power lab. So once that contraction happens and tension builds up, my force tensometer will be able to translate that information through power lab, and I would be able to measure the tension buildup. So how I would record this is I would comment click whenever a clicking mechanism occurs within my beetle. So basically, I'm trying to study whether there's a relationship between tension and time. So let's say between tension, or between click 1 and click 2, the duration of that flexing period is 2 seconds. So I would then take note of that 2 seconds, and then I would then measure the amplitude of the tension buildup between click 1 and click 2. And I would then take note of that again. And once I have all my data points noted, maybe about 30 clicking mechanisms, then I would take my Excel sheet and I would convert the tension, which Power Lab would interpret as millivolts. I would then convert it to millinewtons, since that is the unit of tension. And then I would go into Excel and plot a graph that plots my data of tension versus time, or delta time. So what I would expect to see based on my hypothesis is a positive correlation between the pre-jump flexion and the tension buildup of my click beetle. So here you would see that if the beetle takes a longer time to flex, meaning it takes a really slow time to build up all that elastic energy, I would expect to see a high amount of tension. And that high amount of tension would result in a higher force that would launch my beetle into the air, and hence a faster acceleration, meaning that the beetle would be able to control its takeoff speed. So if my experiment were to give me the results that I showed in the previous slide, I would confidently be able to say that my data supports my hypothesis that there is in fact a positive correlation between the duration of the pre-jump flexion and the acceleration in which my beetle is able to take off during its snapping mechanism. And this all makes sense because the longer it takes for the click beetles to flex their peg moving muscle, the more elastic energy is being stored in those muscles and released during the snapping mechanism. And of course, we know that tension equals to force, which equals to acceleration, and they're all proportional to each other. So why study the hinge mechanism in the first place? Or why even conduct the study that I just proposed? Well, first of all, the hinge mechanism is a unique mechanism found in nature, and no other organism besides the click beetle is known to have this type of adaptation. So understanding the hinge mechanism gives us a better understanding of how organisms evolve to increase their survival rate. In addition to that, this hinge mechanism is serving as a bio-inspiration to many engineers. And actually, a group in the University of Illinois is conducting an in-depth study of this clicking mechanism in order to design self-riding robots. So, in the long run, this hinge mechanism will serve as an inspiration for many different types of technological innovations. And as for future research, I would love to conduct this experiment in lab and actually see if my hypothesis and predicted results are what is going to happen in reality. And another thing I'd want to do was actually my first idea for my capstone, but it was a little too complicated. But I would first want to, of course, um, gather data that supports that the click beetles do in fact have control over their takeoff acceleration. And once that happens, I'd want to apply that information and see whether the click beetles elicit their click mechanism in response to what type of situation they're in. So let's say if they are just trying to self-right themselves, do they elicit a faster or stronger type of takeoff acceleration than compared to when they're just trying to escape? So those are two really awesome things I'd want to investigate. And here are my references. Again, this is the paper where I gathered my inspiration for this project on. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you all for listening. And if you have any questions, don't be afraid to message me. I had a blast doing this. And I've been with most of you my whole undergrad career. So I want to say good luck to all of you guys, and I hope you do well in the future. And spending this class with you guys was awesome. So thank you and enjoy your summer.